You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and just like any other time, we have another amazing show lined up for y'all today. Today, we have a true honor talking to our guest, Dr. Michael J. Hession. He has an amazing website you should check out. It's acknowledgeacceptadapt.com. He is someone that I feel you're going to really appreciate what he can offer to the show. First and foremost, you have a bio that probably take me 2 hours to go through your accomplishments. And I just want to say it's worth reading. We'll have it in our show notes. But I just want to first and foremost say to you, Dr. Michael, if you know anyone who's busy, you're definitely someone that's on that list. So I just want to say right now, thank you for spending some time with us today. How are you doing, man?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, I appreciate you clearing some time off your schedule to talk to us today. So kind of give the audience a little bit about yourself and your professional background, because I feel like you will do much more justice than I would, because there's so much I can choose from. So I'll let you have the floor with that starting out on the show.
Thank you, Shamaya. So I'm a physician. I graduated from Dartmouth Medical School, did my internship in medicine training at University Hospital, Boston Medical Center, and then my cardiology training at the Brigham Women's Hospital. I've been in practice since 1985 at Social Hospital, and I got married to my wife, Colleen, in 1982. We had 2 sons, and the rhythm of my life pretty much stayed the same. Being a husband, a father, and working until December of 2013, when my life, as I knew it, came undone. It started with a cold. I didn't really think much of it. I'd been run down. I've been hampered by hip pain and back pain, and I knew I was going to need surgery, but I was putting it off. I had some steroid shots into my back, into my hip. And so I was kind of run down. My immune system was impaired from all poor sleep and the pain. And this cold just didn't want to go away. And by Christmas, it had gotten much worse. I saw my physician, had a chest x-ray. I was diagnosed with having a simple community-acquired pneumonia. Antibiotics were prescribed, and they should have worked, except they didn't. December 31st, New Year's Eve, I woke in the middle of the night, struggling to breathe. My wife had already been awake, but the struggle of my breathing. And we both knew I was in trouble, and we called 911. I was brought to the hospital that I had worked for decades, and in the emergency room, my chest x-ray now, instead of just having one lobe involved with pneumonia, all lobes of both lungs were a complete whiteout. The term was called acute respiratory distress syndrome. My blood oxygen levels were quite low, and I told my wife that I would need life support. I was brought to the intensive care unit, and I remember speaking to the doctors and my wife that I would need to go on a ventilator. And I remember saying, I want to live. And that's the last thing I said for quite some time. I spent 11 days on a ventilator. The first day or so at the hospital that I worked with for so many years, I wasn't responding to the treatment. My blood oxygen wasn't improving. They recommended that I be transferred into the Brigham Women's Hospital for ECMO, which is essentially an artificial lung reserved for patients whose pneumonias are so bad that regular life support with the ventilator is not adequate. So I arrived closer to death than life. They made some changes, some medication changes, some ventilator changes, and I began to respond. They decided I wasn't going to need the artificial lung. And I began to have treatments called suctioning, where they place a catheter down into your mouth through the tube that's inserted into your lungs, and they suction out the debris from the pneumonia. It's a very unpleasant treatment. I could feel all the muscles in my body resist and fight the feeling. It was unpleasant, but it was necessary to help clear up the pneumonia. After one of those episodes, I don't remember waking up. I remember an odd feeling as though my body was becoming cold and I was drifting off into the distance. I could hear crying, really more like wailing. The term I remember from my childhood is keening, which is a Gaelic term for the sounds of mournful wailing at the death of a loved one. First time I heard that was when my mother died when I was 13. It didn't make any sense. That was a sound reserved for death. It didn't really occur to me that I had died. In the distance, I could glimpse the tear-stained faces of my wife, my sons, my brothers and sisters trying to pull me back. It didn't make any sense, but I could feel myself being pulled away by a stronger force. And after a while, I could no longer hear them or see them. Time ceased to be a dimension, so I have no idea how long this lasted. At some point, I became aware of a white light in the distance. After some period of time, it grew closer, and I could make out the image of a woman in flowing white gown. And she said words I'll never forget. "Michael, it is not your time. There is much to do. You must go back." And I could feel my body gradually becoming warmer. And after some period of time, I recall hearing my wife's voice talking into my left ear, saying that it was good news. The doctors had told her that I was beginning to respond to the treatment and I was getting better. And it didn't really quite dawn on me that I had nearly died. The feeling of being intubated is nothing you can prepare yourself for. It's extremely unpleasant. The suctioning treatment is even more so. But I had to bear it to get better. After 11 days, I was improved enough that they felt that they could begin the process of weaning me from the ventilator. Unfortunately, when that process is underway, they have to withdraw all pain medication, sedation, to make being intubated less unpleasant. I began to experience the pain of what it felt like to have a tube down your throat. It felt like a garden hose wrapped in barbed wire. But it was nothing I could do. I had to withstand the pain. Staying sane throughout that whole period of time really took every ounce of inner strength that I had. After 11 days, they removed the breathing machine. The pain was gone. I was still on oxygen by face mask, but I'd gotten through the first part of my illness. I began to slowly improve, and they switched me to oxygen via a nasal cannula. And that's when they realized I was paralyzed. Paralyzed from the neck down. I had a rare but well-described complication of viral pneumonia called Guillain-Barré syndrome. It was at that point, there was a lot of discussion as to whether I should go to a nursing home or chronic care hospital or something else. And both my wife, who's a nurse, and I knew that my best chance at recovery was in an acute rehabilitation hospital, specifically Spalding Hospital in Boston. And so we requested that I be transferred there. And I was accepted. When they wheeled me out of the elevator onto the floor, on a stretcher, the sign on the floor said spinal cord injury floor. It was quite a jarring sensation. at that point, all of my strength had been focused on breathing, learning how to breathe again, something that I had taken for granted for decades. Now, the shock of realizing that I could not move my arms, I could not move my legs, I could not wiggle my fingers or move my toes, set in. It was overwhelming. I looked at my wife in disbelief, and she just held my hand and squeezed it and said, "You'll get through this." And next came in a series of therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech therapists. Because I had been on the ventilator for so long, I really couldn't safely swallow. I had to be retaught how to swallow. Eating was my first real big victory. I was at Spalding Hospital for 6 weeks. It was probably close to 2 weeks before I could get out of bed. I had to be helped out of bed into a wheelchair. And I was brought down to the small gym on the spinal cord injury floor. And just even the tiniest of exercises, you can't even imagine how minimal they were, the activity they were asking me to do was, but it was exhausting. There are 640 muscles in the body, and pretty much every single one of those muscles had atrophied from the illness. And they had to be rebuilt, and they began to rebuild me systematically. They divided me up, and I worked for 3 hours a day, an hour each time, doing the physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. I got stronger little by little. And then I graduated from the wheelchair to crutches. I don't know if you remember the movie Forrest Gump, but those crutches are called Lofgren crutches, and they're reserved for people who have neuromuscular injuries. Polio. I think in this case it was polio. For me, it was Guillain-Barré. But they were very awkward to use, but I had to master them. And I was brought down to the main gym at Spalding Hospital. There I saw dozens of other people in the same basic situation as I. They couldn't walk on their own. Some of them were paralyzed from the neck down. Some of them paralyzed from the waist down. Most of them permanently. Myself and a few other patients were there with covering from Guillain-Barré. But the exercises were extraordinarily difficult. I remember the first time they had me get up to try to walk. I was in a harness, and I had this guardrails on either side. And my therapy that day was to try to stand up using my arm strength and my leg strength to do it. I would have crumpled to the floor had I not been in a harness. It was very humbling. Each day, I grew stronger. It was not obvious to me, but week by week, you could see an improvement. And after 6 weeks, they decided I would have a day pass. My wife took me to a restaurant we had gone to many times in the Boston waterfront. It was so joyful just to be out of the hospital, feeling normal. She brought me over in the wheelchair. We had lunch. I came back to the hospital room. I was exhausted. But I convinced myself I would be home in a week. I was wrong. I fell victim to what James Stockdale described in his book of his experience of being a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and what Viktor Frankl described in his book Man's Search for Meaning of his time in Auschwitz. That when people locked into a date that they would be freed. And it came and went. They withered and died. And the day I had locked in for my release from the hospital came and went. And I was crushed. I cried like a baby. I didn't know what to do. I thought back my life, the words my father had told me when I was a child, when he came over as an immigrant to this country. No matter how things are, no matter how bad they get, if you fall down, pick yourself up. Never, ever quit. Pick yourself up and start moving. Even if you don't know what direction you're going, pick yourself up, never quit. So I dug down deep inside and I started again with all the energy that I could muster to move forward. One of my physical therapists, she had as a hobby ballroom dancing. One day, she took my wife and I to the main gym, put on a boombox, and she told us, today, your therapy lesson is going to be ballroom dancing. In retrospect, this seems pretty funny, but I was like stunned. I wasn't a good dancer in my best day. But she turned on the music. I held my wife in my arms, and we started to dance a waltz. And her face lit up, my face lit up, and somehow or another, she found a way to unlock inside me the desire to move forward, and I did. Several weeks later, I was discharged home. I spent another year and a half recovering. I had multiple setbacks, but I never quit. I got back. My first goal was to get back home to my wife. My second goal was to get back to taking care of patients again. That seemed a bit of a stretch, but I kept faith that with hard work and perseverance that I could do it. I started using some exercise equipment I had bought for my sons when they were younger in the basement. I couldn't do very much at first. I couldn't even do as much as I did in the hospital when I was at Spalding. But I kept persevering. Week by week, I got stronger. After about 6 months, I got back to work part-time. And things were going well. I kept increasing my hours. And I got sick again. I had to have emergency surgery. It set me back. But I kept my eye on the future. With hard work and perseverance, staying focused, I could recover. And I did. I learned every skill of resilience that was taught to me as a child, that had stayed with me, helped me get through this. Even in the dark days, I never quit. I struggled with how I would find meaning and purpose in my life. I did a lot of reading, and getting back to work, helping my patients, gave me that meaning and purpose. The love of my wife and my sons and my family, my friends, helped me as well. And I used their strength to build on my recovery. And then one day I just realized, will I ever be happy again? Because the life I knew was gone. And I spent a long time thinking about that and reading about that. And I realized happiness in life comes from within. Unhappiness comes from when you're comparing yourself to what you used to have, but no longer have, or may have never had. You have to be happy with your life as it is, to be fully present. I learned to be grateful for what I had. Every day I started keeping a gratitude journal, writing down 5 things that made me happy and how my life would be different without them. That gratitude exercise helped me immeasurably. And little by little I realized The happiness that I thought I had lost was always there. I was just too tied up in looking at the past, what couldn't be regained. I was missing the present and what the future held. So I began to put all my energy into being fully present with my wife, my family, with my patients. And it made all the difference in the world. The techniques that I learned, meditation, mindfulness, helped me greatly. I learned the importance of empathy. Empathy is very different than sympathy. Empathy is when you can relate to someone's pain because you've experienced it. When I spent time with my patients, it was at a much deeper level. I could be fully present with them, not distracted. I could empathize with what they were going through. And this whole process, surprisingly, made me a better person and a better physician. And I wouldn't change it for anything.
Once again, you're watching I'm Refocused Radio and listening to this as well. Talking to our special guest, Dr. Michael J. Hession. Go to his website, acknowledge.adapt.com. I'm glad this conversation went this way. It was supposed to go this way. I had to push all the questions aside because I would not have gotten the content that you just gave our audience. And there's a few things I want to touch on before we wrap up. And that is, first, you could have quit a long time ago and you chose not to. That's beyond powerful, because when you made the point about the risk of locking in a specific date of you escaping or you getting better or whatever, or going out, and when that passed and you made the reference to the storyline of how people can wither away once it goes beyond their reach, what I took from that is there are things in life that are beyond your control. There is nothing you can do about certain things in life. And when life knocks you down to your knees, you only got two choices. You get back up or you stay down. And when you choose to get back up, it's not easy. Because on the outside looking in, it's like, oh, yeah, you just got up and, okay, things don't get better. No. When you get back up, you're going to feel like, what am I doing? Like, it's more painful trying to get up than it is to just sit there, And I think most people can relate to a point in life when life knocked them to their knees. And I truly believe those who press forward is for a reason. I used to say back in the barbershop days in 2017 on the show, when we survive our pain, I believe is God's way of saying your pain will be someone's medicine. Because if you're able to survive that pain, you are going to encourage one person or many persons. But if you can inspire at least one person, then the pain that you had to go through, it was for a good reason. It was for you to wake somebody up. It's for you to encourage somebody. But those are the things that money can never buy. It's funny how we chase life, and you mentioned about comparing ourselves to people makes us unhappy. I agree with that fully, because the way I think of it is the moment you start comparing yourself to the person that you think has it better than you is the moment your hands are full. And God can't do anything with your hands that are full, because you're suggesting that there's nothing else better than what is I'm trying to get. It's when we let go. You talking about being humble? Is when you let go where we finally find something that's actually better. And it doesn't have to equate to money, it doesn't have to equate to fame, but it can equate to peace. That's another thing money can never buy. I'd rather have peace than anything in this world. You can keep your mansions, you can keep your jets, because at the end of the day, your story itself, man, that was a highlight of this week, because it reminds people that even if you can barely breathe, I believe that's God's way of saying, this is your chance. This is your window of opportunity. Are you going to take it now? And I think that's powerful. So I want to say thank you for taking the whole show, because that was amazing. I did not want to stop you and interrupt your story, because that was the window of opportunity for our listeners and our viewers to be able to appreciate everything that you wanted to say, because I have to listen to this myself again, because there's so many good wisdom nuggets that you put out throughout your story. But the main thing is, I want to say thank you for sharing that. I can't even imagine. But it's a very good reminder that if we can learn to appreciate what we have while we have it, that window of opportunity will never come again.
Very well said. I wrote a book about all of this, my whole experience and the struggle that I went through to see a way forward. It wasn't easy, but I go through step by step the strategies that I used. The book is called Physician Heal Thyself, Nearly Dead and the Journey Back to Health. It's available on Amazon, but it goes into more detail what we just talked about, and I think is an excellent resource along with the website. And I think there's a lot of useful information there that can help anybody get through what they may feel is unimaginable. Just never quit.
One thing I want to also address too, while we have you, is this is a story coming from a person in professional career, very successful. Like I said, you can read notes in the Bible. It'll take you about 2 hours to read all the accomplishments you had. But on a serious note, what I got from this whole dialogue is that it doesn't matter how high you go. Life will bring you to your knees. And however it does it, I truly believe it's just a reminder. This is the window of opportunity you have. And whatever we got to do in that window, I mean, you talking about appreciating your family more and appreciating all these different things more, is because I believe in that moment we have the opportunity to say, man, all the things that I missed out on because I was chasing the next goal or chasing the next chapter of what I wanted to add to my accomplishments. I have this window now. And time can never be bought. We can't buy more time. We can buy another house. We can buy another car. We can't buy time. We can't buy relationships. We can't buy more time with our families. This is the window. And I feel like that's what life does. It says, this is all you got. You can't let this go by and be like, hey, God, can you go get a time machine? Let me just have 5 minutes. The powerful point in your story is when you was talking about you talk about the figure in the gown saying that you have to go back. It's not your time. That is powerful. I personally can relate to a feeling of that. And what I mean by that is when life hits you down to your knees, where you have nothing in your strength by yourself to make it, that humbles you. When you find out the oxygen you get to breathe, it's a lot of things that come in play for that even happen for you to even to do it correctly. And I feel like that's what God does. He will allow you to go through so much pain to remind you you can't do this by yourself. You can try to be Superman. You can try to act like and fake it and look the image. But at the end of the day, you are depending on a lot of things that you can't even control yourself. So I just want to again say thanks for illustrating your experiences, because it was raw, no script. We didn't plan this. I hit the banner well after he even did the introduction. I said, wow, it's like he was reading my notes, because I didn't tell him what topic I was going to do before we started. So, yeah, I know we went over time, but this was well worth it. If you can say something encouraging to someone who is listening to this or watching this, understand everyone has different story, different circumstance, whatever. But if someone feels like they are at the end of their rope, what would you say to encourage them not to quit, but to keep going?
Just believe firmly, somehow, some way, even though you can't imagine the way, if you don't quit, if you just get up, eventually you'll find a way forward. You will find happiness, meaning, and purpose in your life. No matter how devastating it may seem, if you never quit and never lose sight of that, you will find a way to move forward.
Once again, you're listening to Refocus Radio and watching us online, talking to our special guest today, Dr. Michael J. Hession. You can go to his website. It is acknowledge, accept, and adapt.com. Last thing I want to comment on is I had many people on the show this year. It's almost been like a common thread. They've been referencing work on the inner man. And I feel like that's parallel to what you were saying earlier about finding happiness inside. I feel like the older we get in life, the more seasoned we are with life and going through life's ups and downs, the trials and the triumphs. I feel like that is a very critical piece into our process and enjoying life. We have to find a way to develop that inner man, that inner person, because if that person stops, it's going to be completely almost impossible to keep going. So once again, I want to say to you, Dr. Michael J. Hession, appreciate your time and everything that you're doing. Man, thank you.
Thank you for having me as a guest today, Shemaiah.